I am not seeing Carla. I'm trying to
Carla?
find her.
Yeah, let's give her a minute, Sylvie.
Okay. Without her, we'd be lost.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Uh, so where are we?
We have everyone on now. Just
What about
including
Carla?
Carla. Carla's here.
Carla's just joined us.
She's on. Yep,
Yes,
she's
here.
Welcome, Carla. Okay, so we're ready to start, and I want to welcome you. This is our third session of the June meeting, and the day today is devoted to engagement team and group audit, an important subject with a lot of technical issues to it. Germane, of course, with impact on independence, and very important because it was born out of coordination with the IESBA, and specifically ISA 600. I want to welcome very warmly and thank Sylvie Soulier, who's heading the task force, for doing all the work. And I also want to thank the task force and the staff for supporting the work we'll be hearing about today. Some members may have sent already advanced comments offline. I don't know if they have, but if so, I want to thank them because this is very good for the board and for the task force. I would only like to ask that people who have sent in comments do not necessarily repeat them here unless they feel that Sylvie has not responded or taken them into account. So having said that, I want to ask Sylvie to take the virtual floor and start her presentation. Oh, also, I don't know if, I have not seen if Denise Canavan is with us. If she is, I want to warmly welcome Denise.
Hi, Stavros.
Hi, good to
How
see
are
you.
you?
Thank you for being with us.
Happy.
Okay, so Sylvie, please start.
Thank you very much, Stavros. I will ask Carla to, oh, wonderful, to put the slide for us. Sorry, I just have to make that slide bigger for me because I don't know my screen. I don't really see that. Yeah, that's better. Sorry, I was not seeing the slide correctly, so it would be a problem to comment. Okay, well, very happy to be with you today and also with the entire task force attending this session. Well, that's, as you say, Stavros, pretty significant topic that we're addressing today, particularly because of the coordination with the IESBA. I will suggest, Carla, we move to the next slide immediately about the objectives of the session. So as usual, we will give you an update on all the coordination activities that we have had with the IESBA and also more specifically with the ISA 600 task force. And we will, over the session, give you some feedback, and expect your feedback also on a number of proposed revisions to the definition of engagement team and audit team. Those definitions are reflecting changes of ISA 220. And we will also spend, I would say, most of the time discussing or presenting to you the work of the task force which is at that point a straw man. We call it a straw man and not yet an exposure draft. But because there are a number of things missing, and we are seeking your direction and input on a number of things. Let's move to the next slide. So how are we discussing it? Of course, we will give you an overview of the coordination with the ISA 600 task force. We did a lot of outreach over the last months with quite important stakeholders group, and we think that it is important for you to tell you how it went and the feedback that we have received and that we have also considered when doing the work of the task force. Then going to the key topics, we are, as you know, reflecting ISA 220, which is a final pronouncement, and also anticipating what will happen with ISA 600 on group audits. So we will talk first about those definitions that we are proposing to have in our exposure draft reflecting ISA 220. Then we will spend some time explaining to you how we developed that updated straw man. And at the end, tell you what type of topics the task force needs to continue to explore and give you a view of our timeline. So let's move to the next one, the coordination with ISA 600. So as you know, we are very, very closely working with the ISA 600 task force. It is an ISA still under development. They have issued an exposure draft last fall. They have received a very significant number of comments. There are pretty, I mean, a lot of work to do to move to a final pronouncement. And a number of the matters that we are exploring or developing in our own task force are closely related to what ISA 600 is doing. So we really need to carefully monitor any change, any addition or clarification that ISA 600 task force is developing. Also provide some input, make sure that they also understand what we are doing. So we are closely aligned. There are a number of areas, for instance, that it would be helpful for them to have some cross-reference to what we're doing, the same way we are cross-referencing to what they are doing. So we need a full alignment. So to do that, we have been working, of course, mostly with teleconferences and emails. The staff at staff level, there are a regular catch-up. So each task force team knows what the others are doing. And we have also teleconference, joint task force teleconference. We had some I would say at chair level exchanges and calls, and we also had representatives of the ISA 600 task force joining one of our task force meeting as well, so we can explain each other the direction, clarify what we are doing, and also have all the opportunity to ask questions for clarification. So what do we discuss during those calls? Of course, the terminology is very important. It is quite important that we use the same words, same expressions, and that they really represent the same thing. For instance, the terminology of the engagement team, group auditor, firm, etc. We have to make sure that for the users going forward, they will find consistency between the work of our two boards. We are discussing the key ISA 600 task force areas of focus. Based on the comments they are received and the feedback from their board, they have organized their work by priority and over the last months. And for us, it is important to know what are the topics that they are I would say, finalizing now, or the one that they are delaying for a later stage. So we don't waste our time, on things that we know might be modified in a few months, for instance, or in a few weeks. They do expect to approve a final ISA 600 in December. So of course there is a pretty important element, which is the alignment of our calendar. And because if they can approve a revised ISA 600 in December, we should be in a position on our side to approve an exposure draft in December 2021. However, if for any reason that task force is delayed, and they cannot, meaning they do have more work to do on some areas, since we want to ensure consistency and leverage what they are doing, that might also have a consequence on our own calendar. So this is something that we are monitoring very closely. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So besides the coordination, which is a very important element of our work, we started to have a number of outreach activity. What we are developing in particularly in relation to group audit independence and the independence of component auditors outside the firm. It is important for us to socialize the principles and that we are developing in the key direction with a number of stakeholders that will be the users and our key commenters when we will be exposing our draft. And we wanted to have also early input from some of them. So 4 very important groups were at our presentation from our side. Of course, we had the CAG meeting, which is the regular process of with the development of IESBA pronouncement. But very key outreach were with the national standard setters, in particular also IOSCO, IFER, and the Forum of Firms. And those 3 for us are very important. IOSCO, of course, are one of the key commenters, and all the IOSCO members also, we know we are seeking their comments and looking at that very closely. IFER is a very important stakeholder for us because there is a part of our proposed exposure draft that relates to breaches. And that would have some consequences in relation to inspections. So it was very important for us to, to explain the principle, the thought process, and get their feedback. And of course, since we are talking about group audits, it is also very important for us that we make sure that we have some good understanding from the Forum of Firms. So we did a presentation to those groups, and I am pleased to say that we really have pretty good general support, both for the coordination effort that we are doing with IESBA and all the proposed principles on the independence requirements that we have been discussing with you over the last months, and also what we are proposing to do on breaches. The meeting that we had, and we really appreciated because all those groups, dedicated a lot of time and effort to really look at what we're doing. They asked a lot of questions, made some very good comments, asking clarification and making suggestions. So for instance, the key topics that were discussed in relation to definition of engagement team and audit team, we continue to have some questions, mostly clarification about the status of external expert independence. It's not a surprise, it was raised in our own group. And there were a number of, I would say, more clarification request and expectation for the board to at some point address that issue. The topic of service providers raised also a lot of interest. For us, it is a topic that is, I would say, still on the side because we don't have the full input from IESBA. So that task force has not spent a lot of time on service providers matters, knowing that we will probably get more guidance in a few weeks, we hope. But it raises a lot of interest. So it's for us, it's quite important that we will be responsive on that one. And also, we had some good discussions on individuals performing quality reviews, particularly with IESCO and the Forum of Firms. On group audit independence, the first topic on the linkage between what is a component under ISA 600 and what are related entities under IESBA raised also a lot of comments and questions. IESCO and IFRIAR in particular challenged the enforceability of the new concept of components for the purpose of independence issues. It is not exactly something for us to address because the definition of a component is up to ISA 600 task force to develop. But we also have identified those challenges, and we will see to the best we can, to be responsive to the comments that we have received. Interesting suggestions from the Forum of Firms on transitional periods in case of mergers in group audit independence, and we will, the task force try to address that. But that was a pretty interesting topic that the task force had not put on the table earlier, and we thought it had a lot of merit, so we explored that. And also additional suggestion to have more outreach and consultation with the investor community and the public sector. And we will talk to IESB and the staff how to do that. On the effective date, we had support on the direction that we were taking since we intend to coordinate with IESB on in relation to effective date, and we had some support on that. I think at that point, if I move to the next slide, this is an opportunity. Yes, can we go back? An opportunity to pause, and I can invite first some of the task force if they want to add anything. For instance, since the CAG meeting and the IESCO meeting, if I remember, were at the same time, I presented to IESCO and Caroline presented to CAG. So Caroline, you may want to add something, and then we can open for questions or comments on both the coordination and also the outreach.
Thank you, Sylvie. Caroline?
Thanks, Ross. Just wanted to add that at the CAG meeting, we did receive support for our attempt to align the definition between the IESB and IESBA in terms of engagement team. So that received support. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we open the floor for comments or questions. Raise Zoom hands, please. Anyone? Cam, do you see anyone that I don't?
No raised hands, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you.
Right.
Of course, if you have any question coming later, I will be pleased to answer it. Let's move to the next. Yeah. So we go now directly into the core work of the task force. So let's talk about the definition of engagement team. We discussed that a few times already. We presented a few versions between September, December, and last March to you based on the definition of engagement team. Just as a reminder, we are working with the final definition of engagement team in ISA 220. So the definition is what it is today. And we do have a number of clarification in the application material that comes with the ISA 220. We took a lot of the feedback that we received in the prior meeting and to modify our definition. So what we are presenting to you now, it's a markup extant code with the proposed definition today, taking in consideration all the comments we received from you, but also from others like the CAG or the group to which we did some outreach. So quick reminder today, engagement team is a generic definition in our code, and it applies to assurance engagement team. And it was based, of course, on the prior definition of engagement team in the ISAs. Today, we do have a revised definition of engagement team for audits and reviews because it is in the ISAs, but there had been no change in relation to what is an engagement team in relation to other type of engagement like assurance engagement or in any other engagement, except we do have in IESQM1 a very high level definition of engagement team. So this is the material that we have been working with and for which we wanted to have a full consistency. So the engagement team definition that we retain, as we have in the code today, is applicable to all types of engagements. So that is something that we are not changing. And we are mostly basing our revised definition based on the high level IESQM1 definition. So we have, I would say the first paragraph is really the engagement team definition, and it would apply to any engagement, audit, assurance, and even non-audit engagements. The differences in the various type of engagement comes from cross-references to other ISAs and with some, I would say, adjustments, whether we will be in part A, 4A, or in part 4B. So 4A, audit and reviews, 4B, other assurance engagement. So the way we are looking at that is after we have the high level definition, and that high level definition includes individuals that used to be excluded before, that are from outside network firms, the firm and the network firm. And then we have the cross-reference for part A to ISA 220. Additional cross-reference to clarify the type of individuals that are also excluded from the definition. And this is coming from ISA 620 and ISA 610. And then we clarify what is the definition in relation to part 4B. So we have one definition, I would say, with some variation depending if we are dealing with part 4A or part 4B with the proper cross-reference. The individuals that are excluded in the definition today are the same that are excluded in the extant code. What we are bringing in the definition here, all those cross-reference in italic, are giving or pointing to additional material that clarifies what are those individuals? So two types, the external expert and some internal auditors providing direct assistance. And pointing to those two ISAs where there are a number of alternative pronouncements that are helping the auditor to determine the objectivity of those individuals if they support an audit. Let's, before I open for comments, I will go through all the definitions related to ISA 220. So let's move to the next one. Okay. The other very key definition that we have in the code, because in the code, when we are telling that certain types of individuals must be independent, we generally refer to what we call audit team. Audit team include the engagement team, as we just defined in the prior slide, but also a number of other individuals. And you remember that we added last board meetings, proposed to add the within the firm or engaged by the firm. We had support for you, and we continue to have support from the CAG and the other stakeholders that we for which we did some outreach. So I think that one was already agreed with by that board, and we have confirmation. We should indeed add those words. And the other point that we changed, further developed based on feedback from this board, and also more discussion with IESBA and discussion with some other stakeholder, is the 3I about engagement quality review. We had to realign those terms because with the ISQM1, ISQM2 revisions, the wording related to engagement quality control are no longer there. And there is direct reference to engagement quality reviews. Also, ISQM and ISQM2 actually on which defines exactly what is engagement quality review and engagement quality reviewers, only address a very specific type of quality review with a number of criteria. But following also some of the comments from that board, we wanted to open beyond the EQRs defined under ISQM2 to some other reviewers that are doing reviews that are not, I would say, 100% meeting the criteria of the ISA, of the ISQM2 quality review, but that are aiming at the same objectives as well. So we clarify in our wording that it includes, you know, those doing EQR and the likes. So that is the definition of audit team. And for consistency and comprehensiveness, we can move to the next slide, which is review team, where we made the similar modification. And also the next slide, which is assurance team. Also, where we do have alignment of the terminology. So those, I would say, 4 definition: engagement team, that is overall with some cross-reference within the definition. And then audit team, review team, and assurance team are will be replacing the current one in our exposure draft. And at that point, I will pause and get your comments. So perhaps let's go first to engagement team, perhaps.
Good.
I think the 2 ones to discuss are engagement team and audit team mostly.
Yes. Comments, please, on engagement team definition. You see any hands?
No raised hands yet, Mr. Chairman. No.
Okay, this is an engagement team definition, please. Well, Sylvie, I don't see any hands.
Okay, I mean, we really reflected the discussion from last time, so I think it makes sense. Let's move to the next one, which is the definition of audit team.
Okay.
Mike Ashley has raised his hand.
Mike, please, Mike.
Thanks, Stavros. And Sylvia, I've sort of raised this a bit in the past, and I'd be interested to know what reaction you got in discussions with the firms in particular, because the bit that I've always been slightly struggling over is the or engaged by the firm, which implies the firm is actually having some form of direct engagement contract, if you like, with other individuals outside of the firm, whereas generally, in my experience, the firm will engage other firms who allocate individuals to do the job. And clearly, the group auditor has the ability to understand the competence of those other individuals, but they don't generally engage them directly. And therefore, I do worry a little bit, and I'll raise the same point when we come on to discussing component auditor and component auditor firm. This concept somehow that it is the firm engaging individuals outside the firm, I find tricky. As I say, I don't know what discussions you had with the firms when you discussed this with them. And flowing on from that, I still worry a little bit about just sticking in C, where we say all those within a network firm who can directly influence the outcome of the audit engagement. Because frankly, I'd worry about anybody, whether they're within a network firm or a non-network firm, who can directly influence. I fully agree that the chances of somebody in a non-network firm being in that position is remote, but as a matter of principle, if they were, why would they not be part of the team?
Okay. Let me see if there is another question, and then I can.
Okay, I don't see any other, but Cam, correct me?
No. Yep, you're right, Mr. Chairman. Yep.
Okay, so Sylvie, please address the point raised by Mike.
Okay, B, I don't think we are talking about only individual engaged by the firm. I think that we are looking at that. I mean, that was the intent of the task force, to look at that in a generic way. They can be engaged many ways. Could be engaged individually, can be engaged through their employing organization. I don't think that the code is prescriptive to try to see that if it is engaged with that type of contract versus another type of contract, that you are or you are not member of the audit team. So we wanted to have that generic, because if we as we go and we are very, very granular, we end up also risking to create some loopholes. We do have the when we go to the strawman, you will see that we give ourselves the possibility to put some application material on the definition. I think that to address the I would say more different ways of engaging people, I don't think that would belong in the definition, because we could end up in a laundry list of the different ways to do it, or we could also put some uncertainties like directly, indirectly. Then the people will say, what is directly engaged and indirectly engaged? So I think the task force wanted to keep the definition clean, but I think we keep your comments, and we will see whether it's something that belongs either to application material, or if we recommend to do some FAQs at some point. So that's for the first one. The second one is consistent with the current code. Those within a network firm who can directly influence the outcome of the audit engagement is in the current code. Keep in mind also that we are dealing with a code that is principle-based. To me, I would say that any individual, I would say almost regardless of the contractual element that is in that possibility to directly influence the outcome of the audit would be caught in the definition. And again, there could be multiple ways to do it from a contractual basis. And I think we were trying to put the principle forward rather than trying to be prescriptive in the type of contractual engagement. So it is something that could also, I mean, the task force will look whether we need to add to the definition to address your point, or see whether it would be in the definition, in application material, or in FAQ. I see there are some other raised hands.
Well, I thought Caroline wanted to add something at this point.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Stavros. So just going back to Mike's question about whether the firms had raised any issues or concerns with engaged by the firm. Mike, they didn't raise concerns like what you've mentioned about us and whether the auditor is engaging the individual or engaging the firm. But the questions were around service providers and also around SM subject matter experts. So not so much, whether is it the individual or the employing organization that's being engaged.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. I do see Ken and I do see Mike. Ken, you have something to add to what was just said?
Yeah, just a brief additional context, if I may. The concept of engagement of an individual, in fact, already rests in ISQM1, because ISQM1 does indicate, and it is very specific, it does refer to individuals engaged by the firm. In fact, not just to perform quality reviews, but to perform a number of different functions, in the context of the firm, potentially utilizing a service provider as an additional resource for different activities, monitoring, reviews, specific aspects of quality management. So it is already in SQM1, and as you say, Mike, it's probably less likely to happen in practice because firms probably will engage other firms or entities to provide assistance or support. But it is, the concept of engagement of an individual is already in SQM1.
Okay, back to Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Silvi. My only comment, I suppose, and forgive me, how I interpreted what you were saying is you felt that or engaged by the firm could encompass, if you like, where the firm engages another firm to do the work and allocates to individuals, it would encompass those individuals. If that is indeed the case, you don't need C, because clearly, if the firm has engaged another firm to do the work, whether that's a network firm or a non-network firm, and there are individuals within it who can directly influence the outcome of the audit, they're going to be caught by B.
Sorry, but network firms are not necessarily engaged either.
Well, sorry, I understood how you interpreted B, that you were saying that it did not mean the individuals were being employed by the firm. It would encompass individuals working for a firm who had been engaged by the firm. If that is indeed the case, then B, I would have thought, would actually capture C, or are you saying it's, even if they're not engaged by the firm at all, they're just part of the management chain, I suppose, yeah, okay. I understand that. Yeah, okay. I do think, though, we need to be clearer about how we capture.
Let me give you an example. Depending on the organization of a network, you can have those who
I understand that
compensation outside and they are not engaged. So it's the network firm really has to be identified separately.
And you're saying with a non-network firm is not going to have an influence unless they're engaged by the firm, and at that point they'd be caught under B. Okay.
Yeah.
I would go along with that, but I would encourage you to look then at application material to make clear what B encompasses.
Okay.
So Sylvie, the task force can take that back.
Okay. Let's move on.
Just
we
a
do
moment.
have.
Just a moment. Do we have another hand cam?
Okay, yes, I wanted to ask if we have any other.
No other hands. Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
okay. So Sylvie, please go ahead.
Okay, so this, as I said, a review team and assurance team, it's mostly consistency and alignment, but the principles are the same. Okay, so I think that's clear. We can move to the next slide, and now we are moving to next section. Carla, after assurance team, yes.
Yeah.
The strawman. Okay, so a few words about what we mean by that strawman. You remember that when we came to you last meeting, our proposal was that everything relating to group audit, rather than putting it on every paragraph, subparagraph, subsection of the code, we would create a separate section that would really address group audits, and where in this situation of group audit, or for instance a component auditor, we directly go to that section and to find everything related to independence there. And you supported that, and so this is the direction that the task force took: create the new section 405. So it's a dedicated section. It is addressing independence in the code, so it's a section 4. It's addressing all independence requirement for component auditors. And in particular, it is addressing something that is missing in the code in relation to group audit, which is the independence of component auditors who are outside the network. Because today the code is more about standalone audits and only applicable to firm and network firm. Now we're talking about group audits and including also non-network component auditors. We are also using that section to provide a more application material to clarify independence requirement for the team members in the context of a group audit. And we are also considering adding a number of paragraphs to address breaches. You remember that we discussed with you the principle and the direction of the task force quite extensively during the last meeting. So now this is going to the strawman. And in relation to breaches in particular, there are a number of paragraphs that we intend to have that are communication with those charged with governance. So this is more or less, what we intend to have in that exposure draft. But at this point, it is still a straw man. We, even if we are presenting to you something that looks like an exposure draft, the wording we need to be refined. In our mind, for the task force, it's more about the flow and the topic that we are addressing in that straw man that I would like to discuss with you. So the correct flow, are we talking about the correct content, whether it is more like at a requirement level or application material level, whether something you believe is missing that we need to add. But we won't go into drafting details, because this is I would say very early today to start to talk about drafting. So let's move on to the next slide, which is really the structure of that new section 405. The structure that we have, we want to have it, of course, consistent with the structure work of general section in the code, but because it is a pretty unique subsection with alignment with ISA 600, it is quite important for us to highlight some kind of proposed definition that are unique to that subsection, and to make sure that the wording that we are using in relation to group audit is clear to everyone. we are putting those definitions at the top of that section because there are not necessarily definitions related to really independence or the entire code. They are very unique here. We can discuss whether you want them here or pushed to the general glossary. But at least since it is a Sherman, for convenience, we have put those proposed definitions here in the section 404. Then we propose to follow more or less the overall structure of the code, but only with the supplement that we have for group audits. So discuss independence considerations that are applicable to individuals. Then independence considerations that are applicable to group auditor firms and also a group auditor network firms. And I would say a more developed subsection, which is applicable independence consideration to component auditor firm outside the network. And this is where we make the distinction on the principle we discussed on public interest and non-public interest entities. And the end of the subsection is dedicated to everything related to breach of independence by a component auditor firm. So it follows, I would say, a logical flow, and we expect that in that section 404, a component auditor or a group auditor will find anything that is relevant in relation to independence, both terminology and requirements and some application material. Let's move to the next slide. So I will walk you through some of the proposed definitions that we have in the Stroman. It's quite important to make sure that every term that we are using is clear. The code, the other parts of the code, there is of course no reference to group. We talk about financial statement, audit, audit client, etc. But in the context of the group, we thought that it was helpful to re-clarify exactly what we are talking about in the rest of the section. And in those definitions, many of them, we are lifting what ISA 600 is doing right now. For instance, the first one is group financial statements. It is directly lifted from the proposed, the ISA 600 pronouncement as it is today with the ISA 600 task force. So we also know that, for instance, if I see the definition here of group financial statement, this is what they are in mind today, what they intend to get for approval. But we know that they might tweak it in the coming weeks, for instance, when they will be discussing that with their board on board or until it goes to final. So this is, to the best of our knowledge, the definition that we have today to ensure consistency. So we created, I would say, in that small glossary, the clarification of the terms that we use in the code in general, as I say, financial statement, audit, etc., and clarify what we mean in the context of the group. So some are pretty straightforward. For instance, the definition of audit, group audits, like audit of group financial statements, it's very straightforward. It's almost obvious. But some others are a bit more complex and are lifted also from ISA 600. For instance, the definition of component, which is key in ISA 600 and which is not a code definition, but we need to have it somewhere in the code for the users to know exactly what we are talking about. There is a second page actually of those definitions that we can go. Can you show it? Yeah. So similarly, we are talking about component auditor. So we are referring here to some individual. And in that one, we do clarify that the component auditor is part of the engagement team for a group audit. So quite important clarification that we are adding here in the definition. we are, as I say, we are distinguishing between the individual component auditor and the firm, component auditor firm. And similarly, the definition of engagement team that we discussed earlier, that applies to the entire code. We want to show what is the variation in the context of a group audit. And also we clarify, based on the definition of audit team that we just discussed right now, what do we mean by audit team in the context of a group audit? So it creates the definition of a group audit team. And similarly, you will see that that definition of group audit team, of course, uses some of the other terms that are defined above. So it's really for the sake of clarity and consistency, and to make sure that people will not have any interrogation or risk of interpretation, taking a term in the general code and applying it in the context of a group audit. We are providing directly, what we mean, but what is that term in the context of group audit? So this is, for us, a pretty important part of our Strawman, section 405, because the rest of the text actually, and all paragraph will be, of course, using all those terms. And it will facilitate also the flow of reading of the other paragraph, but it is also very clear about what we were talking about in that context. I think at that point we do have a pause for comments. Let me check. Carla, I believe it's where we introduce a break. Yes, let's go back to give the opportunity to ask questions, provide input or comments. Can you go back, Carla, to perhaps the first page of definition? Yeah, okay. And also the section. I mean, I will take comments on the outline and that first part, which are those proposed definitions.
Okay, I see some hands. I start with Yaoshu. Yaoshu? Can't hear you. Yaoshu. Well,
hello, Yaoshu, are you with us?
Let's go on to Lisbeth, please. And Lisbeth.
Thank you, Stavros. First of all, sorry for the background noise. I think my neighbor is hammering down his house, but I will. I hope you can hear me well. First of all, well, these definitions are indeed extremely important because they are being used throughout the rest of the strawman. And I actually think that demonstrates the importance of the E-code because it will help readers to scroll over each of these defined terms to be able to actually understand the provisions. Where I have a concern is that for a number of these definitions, you are deviating from the same term in the IESBA 600, at least based on what I've seen from the IESBA 600 revised as exposed. And so could that actually create misunderstanding from the reader, especially practitioner who is well, familiar with what's in IESBA 600 and then just think or assumes that this is exactly the same term? And also, have you gotten any reactions from the IEESB about these deviations?
Thank you. Can I take another comment, Sylvie?
Yes, Andy? Yes, actually I was supposed to propose the same.
Andy?
Oh, yes, thank you. Hi, Sylvie. With regard to the component audit client that's on the bottom of the page, I see that if it's an entity, it includes the control related entities. But if it's a business activity, it just says the entity. Just wanted to confirm the task force thinking that the related entities, controlled or otherwise, are not included with regard to the business activities.
Thank you, Andy. I'll take one more. Sylvie, this is Mike.
Yeah.
Hi, and it's really just a follow up on my previous point, Sylvie, because I think it's on the next slide, but I think you were defining a component auditor who was quite clearly, and you said you'd made this distinction between the individual and the firm at this point. The component auditor who at the request of the group auditor performs audit procedures, and then the component audit firm is the firm that does the procedures again. I would customarily have said it was the firm who is requested, and the component auditor are individuals who work for the firm that is requested to do the component audit work, and indeed work on that component audit. So I just, again, found it slightly odd in the way that was expressed, because I'm not used to giving instructions to individuals. I'd give instructions to another firm to do the piece of work.
Okay.
Okay,
I will,
Sylvie, maybe.
I will respond to those three and then take some more.
Yeah.
Lisbeth, about the deviation, you probably have seen some of the definitions that were in the exposure draft and or discussed at the last board. We, for instance, on group financial statement, we took the definition that the task force gave us, ISA 600 gave us more recently, because they are working on those definitions. So it's not a surprise that you might see some slight changes, because those are the changes that they are considering right now. So we try to work on the most current version of their draft. And this is what we know, that draft could be also fluid, and we might have a slightly different version, let's say in July, after their board meeting. We know that, but for us, we can only take the most recent version, because I mean, for us, it's quite important to see it, and it gives us also the opportunity in the coordination, when we take their most recent version, to have a discussion with the task force and see if there is something that doesn't work or raises additional issues. Then we can go back to them and say, well, you are, for instance, changing that definition, but that creates an issue for us. Can you perhaps readjust or re-clarify or the wording? So we do not intend to have deviation. On the contrary, we intend to have as much alignment as possible. I would say that, for instance, if you look to the, let's move to the next one. Look at the component auditor. We are indeed adding things that are relevant for the code. For instance, when we say a component auditor is part of the engagement team for a group audit, it is not something that is necessarily coming from the ISA, but for us, it is a clarification that we believe is quite important for the purpose of the code, for instance. So for that, that type of deviation or add-ons is intentional. Okay. Andy, you're right on the definition of component audit client, so which is the prior slide. And it is also based to some discussion and some of the challenges that we have had with that new definition of component auditor and how we create that linkage with related entities. When the component is an entity, applying the concept of related entities is easy, because we can work on the legal structure, and that would not make or introduce any changes based on the code. We can be fully consistent in the way the code is already written today. But the challenge is the second one, the business unit function or activity. And it is, for us, we wanted to clarify that, because we don't know how to express, for instance, what is the controlled entity of an activity or a function. So having discussed with ISA 600, we were thinking that that was a useful clarification. And also from some of the questions raised, for instance, by IOSCO and IFIR, I mean, we don't want to create uncertainties where, for enforcement purpose, for instance, where when we are looking at a component that is business unit function and activity, people will have multiple types of diverse interpretation or who is related or not related. So we wanted to be clear. This is why we added those two bullet points. But your understanding is correct. That's exactly the way we wanted to have it. Mike, we will follow up on your comments. It's really a follow-up, as you said, of your prior comments. So since everything here is using the more generic definition, if we make some changes in the generic definition as a result of your prior comment, that will be reflected here. And we will also consider whether we need to add anything more also to clarify your point in the context of a group audit. I think I am ready to take some other questions or comments.
Lisbeth, I see a raised hand. You want to go back on this divergence question that you posed?
Well, I would like to react to the comments that Sylvie just made on the component audit client, and indeed the issue with having to extend a component as defined under the IESBA 600 to the entire entity. But when you think about it, and I also left that in my advanced comments to you, when you are actually being asked to just audit a line item, so a single line item in the financial statements, aren't you then, for some reason, not rather falling under the requirements of Part 4B, so where you just provide assurance on the subject matter information being the inventory line in the financial statement? So what is the reasoning of the task force behind having to apply or comply with an entire set of independence provisions to the audit client and all of its related entity, where in effect you're only looking at just one line item, which, yeah, when you look at the applicability provision for Part 4B, would be an example of that situation. So does it really make sense that you're restricted, for instance, in providing certain non-assurance services when the impact of those will not at all be with respect to the inventory line item in my example?
I think that this is something that we will be addressing when we will go into, what are the independence restrictions that are applicable to component auditors in various situations. But I think that, we have no solution, because you would say that either independence is not required for that function business unit that is under audit, or it is. And for instance, if we're talking about a business relationship, you don't have a business relationship with an activity. You have a business relationship with an entity. So at some point, we need to clarify what is the linkage with an entity. Otherwise, and it was really the issue that was raised by IOSCO, if you don't have somewhere an entity to clarify what is where you apply the independence requirement, well, there is no way to really know what is the scope of independence and how you apply that. Because again, as I say, a function or an activity, it happens only to the extent that it relates to an entity. So for us, the entity, we needed really to create that linkage, follow what Andy was saying, from a component to an entity at some point. And I mean, frankly, if you have some other suggestion, we will be open to explore. to see how to do it differently. Again, keep in mind, we're working on an exposure draft. We will be seeking some comments, but the feedback that we have received is, for the purpose of independence, we need entities for enforcement, clarification, etc. So
Okay.
for us, it's about finding the right level of linkage, about which entity are we talking about. That's really, and I agree, it is a challenge, and there could be some many variations. I see Ken, you wanted to add something on that? You have your
not too much on that. No, on this issue,
Yeah.
I fully agree. So I hope you can hear me. Yeah, I fully agree with what you've said, Sylvie, that the linkage to the concept of an entity is critical for independence purposes. But certainly we can consider Lisbeth's comments with regard to whether Part 4B would be a better set of independence provisions to apply in this particular case. But it is going to depend on the particular situation, because from the ISA 600 perspective, the concept of a component can be very broad. It can be a line item, as you say, as Lisbeth, but it can be an entire function. You know, maybe it's the entity that provides the underlying accounting system. So maybe that issue will merit a bit further discussion with the ISA 600 task force. I just wanted to go back briefly to the discussion on the definition of the component auditor, because I want to make clear that everybody understands that definition as we have it in the slides is identical to what is in the ISA 600 post-exposure draft version. It is identical except for the words audit procedures, which we have put in place of audit work. The ISA 600 task force is using the term audit work instead of audit procedures, but otherwise it is identical, including the last sentence that says a component audit is a part of the engagement team for the group audit. So just to be clear that we've not tried to diverge from the ISA 600 definition.
Okay.
Sylvie, I do see Yao Shu
Yeah.
back. So let's hear if she has Yao Shu.
Okay, sorry, some connection problem. I see that the definition of a group engagement team includes component auditors, and I think for some component, which is very important, is material to the group, and but I think that's all the definitions exclude that those people or others within the component audit firm who can directly influence the outcome of the audit, the group audit, because it's those people is within the component firm, audit firm, but the component is important to the group audit, and I think those people can also directly influence the outcome of the group audit. But those people, we didn't give them a definition. For the group audit team, only comprises of others within the group audit firm, but excludes the component audit firm. So I'm not sure whether that's those people within the component audit firm who can directly influence the outcome of the group audit, whether they should apply the independence requirement. Thank you.
You're sure, actually, this is why we have modified the definition of engagement team. Engagement team include individuals outside the firm and the network firm who are performing audit procedures. That's the key change that we just discussed before. So actually, component auditors from outside or service providers who are performing assurance procedure, they are now part of the engagement team.
Okay, thank you.
It is generic. So they are always code with the new definition that we discussed earlier. So that's they are in. So your concern actually is fully addressed because everything that we did in engagement team was meant to include those individuals. And here it is just re-clarifying or repeating that indeed in the context of a group audit, it is there as well. So it's a reinforcement of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands. Cam, do you see any other raised hand?
No other hands, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Sylvie, thank you.
Okay, so going forward, based on those definitions, as we said, we are all the terminology that we have been using in the rest of that strawman are using the term as defined in those 2 pages that we presented to you. So as I said, the rest of the strawman, we will be addressing certain key subsection. And consistent with the structure of the code on all the subsection, we clarified what is the requirement and what are the application material. So today we have tried to develop the requirement. The application material, we put what we believe is helpful here, but we are open to suggestion whether we need to add more paragraph and application material or certain to clarify or explain or put some examples on certain areas. So for us, the first one is very, very straightforward. We are mirroring what is in the code in the context of audit, standalone audits, and we're clarifying that what is happening in the context of a group audit. So here we're talking about members of the group audit team as defined earlier. So that's the broader group of individuals, firm, network firm, outside component auditors, the chain of command, etc., as we define. And of course, we're talking about independence of the group audit client as we defined earlier. And you see that the group audit client is the group that is audited, their related entities, and the component as defined under ISA 600. So the reason why also we wanted to have those definitions above, it will keep the text here more straightforward and cleaner because of the concept that we are using. But I mean, it looks like a very simple sentence, but because of the definition, that is capturing a lot of messages and contents because it will clarify the individuals, and it's a large group of individuals we're talking about, and it clarifies all the entities for which independence is required. And in the context of the group here, we might be talking about a large number of entities. And the application material, when we mean shall be independent, we do, of course, the cross-reference to Part 4A of the code. We were thinking, I mean, we don't want to repeat everything in Part 4A. We're just re-clarifying, use Part 4A, and in a sense, you just substitute terms like audit to group audit team, and group audit client. And with that, we were considering that we are capturing those new individuals that are added, and we are correctly delineating the scope of independence requirement for individuals. Let's move to the next one. So let me pause here. Let's go back because it looks simple because it's only 2 sentences, but we believe it's because of the definition it is capturing the essence, I would say, of what will be applicable to group audits. But the question that I have is on the whether you think that there are some topics that need to be developed, like application material, and the task force might consider that, or whether it should be here or perhaps in an FAQ. I see Lisbeth is raising her hand.
Yeah, so when you said earlier that yeah, the task force is still considering whether more application material is necessary. My reaction was no, let's keep the provision simple, but you can, of course, give examples in an FAQ or in a non-authoritative material. But I don't think we should be adding more stuff in there. Well, when I read it, it's crystal clear to me what it means.
Okay, thank you.
Any other views on that, please? I see Galen. Galen?
Yes, thank you. And I think I agree with Elizabeth, what she just said about additional material. But the one thing that I keep coming back to is, and maybe it's covered elsewhere and I just don't realize it, but what does it mean to directly influence the outcome of the audit? I kind of keep coming back to that in terms of what does that actually mean? Does that mean the conclusion in the audit report, the evaluation of evidence? I mean, you have a broad spectrum of players here, all the way from interns to a CEO of an audit firm. So I wonder whether the task force has kicked that around a little bit.
Let me give you an element of an answer to that, Galen. Actually, we have been considering that type of application material or FAQ that was perhaps necessary to further clarify what we said about the definition of engagement team in general. And we were saying, well, there are certain elements of clarification, like the one that you just raised, they are not specific to group audits in general. When you say, what does it mean to directly influence? Since it is a term that is used progressively through the entire code, it doesn't belong to section to that section 4 or 5. It should be somewhere else, perhaps like the way we discussed network firm, etc. And actually, the task force was considering also, but not now, but perhaps in June, in September, I mean later, to come with either application material or propose a topic of FAQ to clarify those definition of engagement team. But it's pervasive. For us, it doesn't belong to group in particular, it belongs to the entire code. So that, but we had that discussion. Brian, I see also that, yeah, sorry, Cyrus.
Oh, I'm sorry. If you haven't finished, please do. I finish up. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
No, I'm done.
Well, I see Brian. I wanted to recognize Brian as a raised hand.
Thanks. Thanks, Everson, and thanks, Sylvie. I just actually wanted to echo Lisbeth's comments. I think that it's clear as is, and I didn't see a need for any additional application material to the extent that there were some other examples or something that might aid in clarification. Not that I see any. I could imagine that that would be well positioned in an FAQ or something like that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Sylvia, I think you got mostly a positive response to this remaining simple, and I would add my own echoing of what Lisbeth and Brian were saying. I think so too, that it should remain simple and clear.
Thank you. Well, then I will suggest we move to the next one. Okay, this slide is just a reminder. We discussed that as length last time. I just wanted to lift it again to so you keep that in mind, and we can show you. You know, we discussed those principles with you. You were in agreement. You know, about what is the framework you apply in the for independence in the context of a group audit. And you remember we said the principle is it is the status of the group that will direct what is the independence framework that we would be applying. And you were in support with those principles. I wanted to confirm to you that when we presented exactly the same slide and those principles to both IOSCO, IFER, and the Forum of Firm, all were also in support of those principles. That it is the situation of the group that would direct the framework that you apply for independence purposes. And in particular, you know, the scenario which is the group is not a public interest entity, even if the component itself is a public interest entity, you, for the purpose of the group audit, only for the purpose of the group audit, you continue to apply the non-PI framework. And similarly, if the group is a public interest entity, you apply the public interest entity framework, regardless of the situation of the component, could be a PI or a non-PI. That's, we're talking about a group audit here, and this is what would apply through the entire group audit. So this is a reminder, and we have a support on those principles. And this is what we took, and then we intend, of course, to put that in our Strawman. So let's move to the next one. So this is more or less what we want to propose. Again, we try to, I mean, it's not a drafting exercise. We are just to make sure that we have the right requirements at the right location, and they are more or less expressing the right principle that we want. So we wanted to clarify what is the situation of independence for the firm. So we are talking about the group auditor firm, and similar to what we just explained earlier, we are now using the new defined term with group to clarify what we intend. So the requirement is really group auditor, independent of the group audit client, and you apply part 4B. Very similar to what we said for individuals. And we have that for the firm. Then we have also the clarification for the network firm. You remember that we separate firm and network firm in our code. So now it is clear and straightforward. We have it in that subsection. And then, of course, we are adding the consideration for the component auditor firms outside the group auditor firm network. And this is where we are looking at those two scenarios: group audit clients that are public interest entities. And if you go to the next page, it will be a group audit client that are non-public interest entities. But let's go back to where the first page. And so here, something straightforward requirement. When the group audit client is a PI, component auditor firm outside has to be independent of the component audit client, the one that they are auditing, in accordance with Part 4A applying to public interest entities. That's exactly what we had in the principal chart earlier. And we are adding also the B, which is in the code. The code actually says that when it is adding for non-public interest entities, it is adding an obligation of not having financial interest in a controlling parent. So the controlling parent is outside the usual, you know, entity plus control entities. And we needed to add that entity B in relation to financial interest to align fully with the requirement of the code. So this is what we have for public interest entities. And if we go to the next slide, for our Strawman, we are clarifying that when the group audit client is not a public interest entity, you apply Part 4B to non-public interest entities. Again, what we just explained in the slide above, you know, on the principles. And we are adding to that two more paragraphs, which are requirements. The first one is requirement 9. It is also lifted from the existing code. It says that when there is some specific situations that would, when you apply the conceptual framework, that would direct you to add some additional entities for you to be independent of. you need to apply the conceptual framework and consider them, whether you should also apply independence to them. So we are mirroring that. And we are mirroring that both for the firm and the network firm, and also from the component auditor outside the firm. And there is one element that we are adding also is for the situation, it is something that where we got some comments from IOSCO, IFIOR, and I think the CAG. Just a reminder that if you are the component auditor, you might perhaps only apply the non-PI framework for the purpose of a group, but if you also perform a standalone audit, you also have to apply all the pronouncements and the paragraph of the code to make sure that you follow your independence requirement for your standalone audit, and this is the code, and also the requirement for the purpose of your contribution to the group audit. So we are adding that 11A1 little paragraph as well. And actually with that, and again, based on all the definitions that we have that are really delineating more clearly the scope, we wanted to have a pretty, I would say, straightforward requirements and fully aligned in the way the code is written today. I believe that this is now for a pause, and we will perhaps listen to your points and questions. Yes.
So I see Lisbeth.
Thank you, Stavros. Can you go back to our 405.7, please? Yeah, so I fully sympathize with the addition of B there and the fact that you're trying to mimic what is in R5 10.6 with regards to the investments in material controlling entities. But the way it's written now, and I don't know it's done on purpose, and that is actually my question, is for a listed PI entity, given group audit client includes is related entities, you are actually also restricting this way investments in commonly controlled or material commonly controlled entities, so sister entities. Is that intentionally, is my first question. And then to go to the next one, or 4 or 5, the next page, please. The non-PI situation, given we have the R5 10.6 restriction in the code for non-PIs as well, why aren't we having something similar for the non-PIs as well here in a group audit situation? The instances are much smaller of having these kind of investments, but nevertheless, shouldn't we be aligned somehow to the principles for normal audit clients, if I can call them that way?
Sylvie, I have other comments. May I collect 2 more?
Yes, I am sorry. I want to clarify Lisbeth's comment. Sorry, the second part of your comment was referring to the next page. Yes. Can you repeat the one that you were saying on non-public interest entities?
So on non-PIs, we don't have that B, the R5 10.6 provision, and so my question is, why aren't we having it? I can see that the number of cases where you would have these kind of investments, because it's private entities, is probably much smaller. But given you have that similar provision already in R5 10.6 for a normal audit client, if I can call it that way, I'm wondering why we are not including it here either.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you. Yes, we can take some other questions and then we can come back to that.
Well, I'm thinking that it's time for a break. So maybe if you wouldn't mind, you can answer Lisbeth's question, then we go on a break and we take the remaining questions.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Let's go back to 7. Yeah. So the position that we have, and that again we presented last time, and to the also IESBA and IFR and Pharma Firm, is when we're looking at the component, the independence of a component auditor outside the network, we stand on the component. Because actually the component that component auditor only audits the component, and we define the component audit client as well to clarify for what are the entities for them for which they have to be independent. So the position, the principle that we discussed actually last March was for the component auditor outside the network, we look at their independence standing at component level. So we start from the component, and this is where we are looking. This is the scope. So they include all the controlled entities, and the framework that they are applying is the components, the controlled entities, and we wanted to add that you don't necessarily go up and over, because the component itself, the situation, whether it's a pi or a non-pi, it's not at that level that you define it. It is at the level of the group. So if you look at the component normally, you apply the framework that applies to pies. For instance, you will not provide the non-assurance services that you will not provide to a public interest entity. But that will apply to the component and their controlled entities. And in addition to that, to align to the code, we are also capturing the prohibition to have a material financial interest at the group level. So going above. If we move to 8, we don't need to add that actually, because if you can you go to 8? When you say you are in accordance with the requirement in Part 4A that apply to non-public interest. Well, Part 4A would say if you audit a non-public interest entity, you cannot have a financial interest in the parent company if the entity is material. So we don't need to repeat what we have in B. It is missing in paragraph 7, but in paragraph 8, the requirement in Part 4A are already including that prohibition. So that's really the way we were I would say articulating those limitations. While in 7, it is not clear that you have the prohibition on the financial interest.
Yeah, and I appreciate that explanation on the 8, but the problem with 7 is that group audit client is defined as a defined term as the group audit client, including its related entities. So you might end up in restricting investments in sister entities of that group audit client that fall under the definition of related entities. That's the point that I was making.
Okay, we will look at the wording because that was not our intent.
Okay, so Sylvie, thank you very much, and thank you all who commented. Let's take a break for 15 minutes, and we'll come back. So we'll come back at 45 minutes after the hour.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Stavros, I think you're on mute.
Indeed, I am on mute. Thank you. Thank you, Carl. So we're back. We're here, ready to continue. And Sylvie, floor is yours again. You're on mute.
Yeah, I suggest we put back the slides. Yes, and we continue with the questions.
Yes, we had 2 questions left, and there are more now. Let me turn to Sadia.
Good day, everyone. When you're holding your hand up during tea, you really consider whether you want to make the comment in plenary or not, especially since it's linked to the comment that Elizabeth just made. But after 15 minutes, I'm still undecided on whether I understand this completely. So let me go. R405.7 has this part B in it, which speaks about that not hold a direct or material indirect financial interest. And R504.8 is silent on the financial interest. Sylvie pointed out that there's already a provision, but there's also a provision for non-PIs as well, and that's R510.6. Looking at them starkly under the 405 section, you might get the feeling that there isn't a requirement for non-PIs. And I'm wondering if you'd want to build in a cross-reference to the R510.6 provision. Thank you.
Can I go on, Sylvie?
Yes, of course.
So Mike is next. Mike.
Thanks, Davros. I had 2 points, I suppose, Sylvie. Again, with R405.7, I looked at it from the different end of the telescope, so to speak, in terms of if we're including that one in there, and I can understand why we don't want to include all the prohibitions, if you like, looking upwards to the group audit client on a component auditor. But working from first principles, I said to myself, are there other relationships which, other than just looking at the conceptual framework and getting people to think about it, I would actually wish to prohibit? And the one that immediately struck me was that I would feel very uncomfortable if, as the component auditor firm, for example, was being bankrolled by the group audit client. So I do question whether there are other things like loan relationships that we ought to be thinking about prohibiting in this context, as opposed to merely relying on the conceptual framework. Going over now to R405.9 and 405.10, given the very clear prohibition we've got in 405.7 and 405.8, or clear exhortation that a component auditor firm shall be independent of the component audit client, can we not rely on the general requirements in 400.20, which indeed requires any firm in considering its relationships with its audit client, if it's aware of other relationships with other related parties, it has to take account of those. So why is there an additional need to put in those 2 requirements? Is it not already covered?
May I take those 2 points before we move? So
yes, please.
Sadia, I understand your point, whether we need to, and I think it's a good point perhaps to think about a cross-reference in 8. That could be the type of application material paragraph that we may want to add, because you're right, in our mind, if you say sets in part 4A, that's part of it, but to the extent that it creates a differentiation between paragraph 7, I see your suggestion with some merit. So the task force will look at it. I think it makes sense. Looking at what you said, Mike, 9 and 10, I mean, or the equivalent, I would say, in the code, does not apply to component auditor outside the network. And that's the issue that we have here. We need to bring in what is missing. Because if we read the code as it is, we're talking about the firm and the network firm. but it is silent. It doesn't refer at all to component auditors outside the network. And since
Sorry, if we're saying a component auditor firm has to be independent of a component auditor in accordance with 4A, how do you apply it other than interpreting it as that firm needs to be independent of that entity? And if that firm needs to be independent of that entity under 4A, then 420 applies.
Well, the thing is, look at 7. As I said, we are talking about a component auditor outside the network. We stand at the component level. So the independence is required for the component and their controlled entities. That's the core, that's the minimum. So actually what we are saying is that you might want to bring...
No. But you're saying a component auditor firm, if I read 7, a component auditor firm outside the network shall be independent of the component audit client in accordance with Part 4A. I therefore have to apply, because it's in Part 4A, 420. That requires me, as the component audit firm, to have account of relationships with other related entities to that component audit client.
Okay, Sylvie,
I'll leave you to reflect on it.
Okay, we can discuss, but look at the definition of component audit client. It is not the entire group.
It's only the component audit client, but that's the thing I'm being required to be independent of. And if you flip over to 405.9, it's against that criteria. You're looking at related entities of that component audit client. So everything's defined back to the component audit client, not the group client. It's the component audit client. I fully agree with that. I'm just saying I don't see the need for this.
Okay, we can re-explain to you, but actually we believe that 9 is capturing entities that are not captured in 7, particularly the up and over ones. To go back to a point on loans, for instance, etc.
I would prefer that we don't have dialogues like that, please. I think we have to give everybody the right to ask their questions. So I have, whom do I have? I'm sorry.
Junpei, Mr.
Junpei.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you very much for your presentation, Sylvie. I have 3 comments on this. The first one is on sentences. I believe that it would be desirable to keep the sentences concise and easy to understand. Although sentences usually tend to be long as they deal with complicated issues. The second one is on a FAQ. It might be good for FAQ to illustrate the independence requirement for a group auditor or component auditor in line with group audit structure by using charts, etc. at the timing when the exposure draft is released. This is because that I believe this topic is complicated as there are cases including network firm or non-network firm and pi or non-pi, etc. It is very complicated. The third one is on requirement in the code. ISA 600 has a requirement for a group auditor. For the enforceability and consistency with IESBA standards, I believe that IESBA code should have a requirement for a group audit firm to confirm that a component audit firm maintains its independence appropriately. That's my comment. Thank you.
Junpei, I fully agree with your 2 first points. If I remember, respond to that. Again, you know, this is a straw man. We need to refine the wording, and yes, we will work on the drafting. And I agree, if we can find a way to make the sentences simpler, more straightforward, we will try to do that. Your suggestion to have some charts, whether in FAQs or in the explanatory memorandum, is a pretty good suggestion. And I think we will work with the task force and the staff to see if we can even lift some of the charts that we use, you know, to add to the explanatory memorandum, because you're right, that could be helpful. The last one, actually, you know, yes, ISA 600 says that group auditor and component auditor have to be independent. But the issue is, particularly when they say that the component auditor has to be independent, they are not saying what are those independence requirements. And this is what we're doing here. Actually, we are starting from that sentence in ISA 600 about component auditor being independent. If you read the code today, you don't know what a component auditor outside the network has to apply, which framework, and what are the independence requirements. So actually, the entire section 4 or 5 that we are creating is here to say, what do we mean in ISA 600 when we say component auditor has to be independent? And actually, we do work together with ISA 600. So we will have at least using the same wording and the same cross-reference both ways.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have, I don't see if we have any other question.
I don't see others. So please proceed. Okay. Wait. I see Sungnam, you had a comment? Apparently not.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. So I would move to the next section. Okay, well, let's talk about breaches. So here again, that slide is to remind you about the context and the discussion that we had last board meeting about what is the process that would apply to a component auditor outside the network identifying a breach of independence. And we had a discussion with you about what should be the protocol to apply when there is an identification of a breach by the component auditor. And we presented also the same process or protocol to IESBA and particularly IFER. We spent some good time with IFER discussing, you know, what would be the expectation when there is the identification of the breach. And they were in support of what we had discussed with you last time and what we want to do here. So mirroring what we have already in the code, but clarifying the discussion, I mean, the actions that need to happen and the interaction between component auditor, group auditor, and ultimately with those charged with governance. So let's go to the next slide to show you how we are looking at the issue. So we are talking about a very specific situation, which is the breach of an independence provision by a component auditor firm. And we wanted to re-clarify or reiterate that when you have a component auditor firm, of course, if it is within the network, you do have to refer to what is already in the breach provisions in the other part of the code. So the two first paragraphs are pointing to, I mean, first providing some general background by referring to ISA 600 when there is a breach. And two, when you are within the network, send you to the correct paragraph. Then the last part, which is really the addition, is mirroring the protocol that we have in R480 to R480, etc. When you have component auditor firm identifying a breach. And we are mirroring exactly the key expectations. So first, what is happening at component auditor firm? And you expect that what will happen here would be the same, whether it's component auditor outside the group, outside the network or inside the network. So it's about evaluating the identifying, evaluating the significance, the impact, etc. But then when you move to D here, so instead of communication to those charged with governance, we are talking about communication to the group engagement partner. So the expectation is the communication of the breach issue between component auditor and group engagement partner. So the proper cross-reference plus the added action in D. So let's move to the next page. Then we are adding some new requirements for the group engagement partner. Because similarly, the group engagement partner will have to assess the capacity to continue to work with the component auditor. So this is also added to the protocols on breaches. And this is something that we are also discussing with ISA 600, because since we are talking about expectation at group engagement partner level, we need to make sure that they are also, putting what we need, I would say, to be able to articulate and leverage what we're putting in our code. We are expecting from the group engagement partner to look at that breach the same way they look at breaches in the, I would say, the general code, and also evaluate the breach in a similar way, in particular, whether they can continue to work with that component auditor, and using exactly the same tests, the reasonable and informed third party, and the evaluation of the objectivity of the component auditor. So we are mirroring it, but here it's an expectation that applies at group engagement partner. Then we move to the next step, which are providing some new application material to breaches to respond to some of the unique situations that were not addressed in the code previously. And this is where we are giving some more extensive, I would say, guidance to or application material to help a group auditor firm to determine in which situation or what would be the example of action to address the consequence of the breach. And this is also something that we are doing in discussion with the ISA 600 task force. So we were talking about, you remember, there were a number of scenarios that we presented to you, where I would say the first scenario, it is the situation can be addressed by the component auditor. The second scenario is the situation could be addressed by the group auditor. And then the third scenario being, well, there is nothing that can be done to address the consequence of the breach. And then the consequence is that the component auditor is not objective and the group auditor cannot rely on the work of the component auditor. So this is the application material that we intended to introduce to help and guide group auditor firm to evaluate those situations. So we are developing those scenarios with examples of actions. So that's consistent with the structure of the code. We can move to the next one also. Okay, so actually, sorry. After there is that determination by the group auditor, their expectation is to what will happen with the communication with those charged with governance. And also here, the communication with those charged with governance is between the group auditor firm and the group audit client. The component auditor is not expected to have a direct communication to those charged with governance at group level. So it is something that we need to introduce ourselves with the proper guidance. And we, consistent with what we have already in the breach section, we are providing, the requirement to discuss the issue and what shall constitute the content of that discussion, and also consistent with the way breaches is written, the final point, which is the expectation to obtain concurrence from those charged with governance on the entire situation and how to address the consequence or take some of the conclusions, for instance, in relation to the impact of that breach. So mirroring, as I said, breaches, but we had to introduce, actually, instead of having two players, the auditor and those charged with governance, here the process is developed with three players: component auditor outside the network, the group auditor, and then goes to those charged with governance. So again, as a reminder, we presented the principle and the flow to IFER in particular, and they were in agreement with us. And we put that now in the strawman. Again, to go back on Junpei comments, we might tweak some of the way it is expressed on the drafting. But what is important for us is to have your agreement, at least on the flow and the direction, and also I would say the content, the topics that we are addressing here in the breach section. You will see that most of the paragraphs here are requirements. There is little application material, except on the page before, to help the group auditor to evaluate the consequence of the breach. But most of the paragraph here are the requirements mirroring what is in breach. We wanted to make sure that we would not repeat entirely all the application material in the breach section. That would be no need to paraphrase. So we wanted really to highlight the key requirements here, the revised process, and only put application material to what is unique to those situations in actually it's the page just before that one. Yeah, that one. So that's pretty unique because it's about how group auditor shall evaluate the significance of the breach and the impact on objectivity. I think with that, that is the end of the presentation on breaches, and I will take some comments from everyone here. Yeah.
I see Kim Gibson.
Thank you. Hi, Sylvie. Thank you for this. I believe the flow is in the right direction, the way that you have laid it out. I do have a question on R40517.17. So I think it's the slide after. Yeah. So if those charged with governance do not concur, is one of the options for the group auditor not to rely on the component auditor? And I would imagine that would be one of the options. And to me, this paragraph this requirement does not get me there. It almost feels as though the component auditor can, in certain situations, can be retained with the group doing additional work. So unless I'm reading this wrong, but is one of the options not to rely on the group, I'm sorry, on the component auditor? Thanks.
We take some, do we have any other comment or?
No other comments at this time.
Yeah, Kim, I think it's a drafting. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Sangnam?
Okay, all right. I have one small question on the first page. Slide 4, restriction 405.13. Yeah, in subparagraph C, I'm not sure I understand fully, but it says determine whether it's possible to take action, and then after that, and whether such action can be taken. It looks like to me there is a overplay. I suggest the task force revisit the wording.
Okay. Oh, I see Lisbeth too.
Yeah, on this same slide, reading 4.5.12a1, especially that last sentence, the group engagement partner has sufficient time to respond and address the breach. Do they really have to address the breach? Isn't it rather that the group engagement partner decides what action they have to take as a result of the occurrence of the breach, whereas it's the component auditor who actually needs to address the breach in compliance with the breach reporting requirements?
Okay, I will respond to those three comments. Can we go to Kim's point on 17 already? Okay, so I think it's a drafting issue here, Kim. The way you, I understand your point about what is expected. Actually, we expect here to have the situation indeed where those charged with governance, they believe that the component auditor cannot do something. I mean, they shall be removed, I would say, from the audit. And it is up to the group auditor to either audit themselves, etc. So it's probably, if it doesn't come clear to you, we would need to work on the drafting, and I propose we could also talk to you to make sure that the words are clear enough. Sangnam, 13B, let's go back to 13B. Actually, 13B, the way it is written is mostly aligned to the way it is written already in the code. We can look at it again to see, if we need to revisit that wording. But on A, B, and C in particular, we wanted to be as close to how the code is already written, with a clear reference to the right paragraph. But we can certainly look at it again.
Right.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you. Lisbeth, A1. Well, it is another area where we lift the exact wording from the ISA 600 as it is in their current draft. And actually, on breaches, we gave a lot of input to the ISA 600 task force on a number of areas, and we are also asking them to help us because if we put certain requirements, we believe that it would be helpful that they would echo those requirements using a consistent wording with us as well, to the extent that we're talking about, for instance, communication between the group engagement partner and the group audit client, for instance. So I understand your point about sufficient time to respond and address, but here we are really, and it is, as I say, it's more a background paragraph. You see, it's under application material labeling. We will go back to them and see, whether they are open to modify the way they are talking about breaches. But I will just tell you that on breaches, we gave them already a number of input and suggestions to make their text more consistent with the way we address breaches in general, and also the way we describe those situations. But your point is taken. I think it makes a lot of sense.
No other raised hands. So Nam, can I just check that? Did you have a follow-up point, or could
Oh,
you?
yeah. Yes. I'd like to ask the what? I have one question on slide 21. At the bottom, it mentioned a standalone audit. I understand this language is widely used in practice, but I'm not sure whether the language came from the exposure draft of ISO 600. If not, I think we can use the expression used in the exposure draft.
It's a good point. I agree that the term standalone audit may not be clearly defined or explained. So we will look at it again. I agree. We can look at that also.
Thank you.
Okay, I see.
Okay,
I
let's
think-
go back to breaches. If there is any other comment on breaches.
Yeah, so now if you could take your hand down if you don't have any further comments.
Okay, so let's move to the next part, which is we're going to the end. So there are a number of matters that we have not yet developed and that have not made their place in the Strawman. You remember we said that we are expecting ISA 600 to give more guidance about the use of service providers. We are still expecting any additional guidance that we could have on components and how they are conceptualized in ISA 600, and it is also to reflect, some of the other comments that they are received, not related really to independence, but we had a number of regulators, for instance, who were asking about whether the concept of materiality should be entirely removed or put back. You remember when we were presenting to you in March, the concept of material component is no longer there. And that was one also of the elements that was sometimes a challenge for us when we were trying to establish the linkage between component and related entities. And also the other point that we need to address is the implication of some of the recent changes to the code that were adopted, whether we need to reflect some of it in our subsection 4.4, and I am talking about NAS and fees. So we need to have a reading of NAS and fees, keeping an eye on the context of group audit to see whether there is anything that would be needed or need to be added to our Strawman to become an exposure draft. So just to give you an illustration, if we move to the next slide, we pencil in certain, I would say, subparagraph, whether it's mostly we were thinking, there could be some application material here, but other service provider firm, the independence consideration applicable to those other service provider firms. A good point that was raised by the former firm, and that the task force has not had the time to explore so far, and we are considering also adding some perhaps application material or elements in our Strawman. It is in the situation of mergers and acquisitions, and we were told, the pretty good point during the discussion with the firms, that when you have a group audit, the group itself or the group audit client could have a different scope over the year. It's the group audit client is not necessarily a fixed group of entities in the beginning of the audit. There could be mergers, acquisitions. So there could be a need to include new component auditors to be able to perform the group audit as required, by the deadline required. And in particular, those new component auditors may have already some independence issue with, for instance, the acquiring group in relation to the component auditor, because they were doing an audit for, let's say, a standalone entity, let's say, for instance, following the non-PI framework. And that entity is acquired by a public interest entity group. And they may not have followed the expected framework for public interest entities. So we need to look at those situations where, consistent with the code, where we might have some transition issues and how to address those situations. So we are penciling in some application material and paragraph to address those issues. And we are also thinking, do we need also to look at the rest of the code at some point to introduce certain cross-reference and how that could be articulated with the group auditor firm network. Particularly, we could need to add something in the introduction. So there will be, you cannot just add or drop a new section without having any reference in the rest of the code. So there will be necessarily some additions or paragraph to make sure that we point to that additional subsection. For instance, in breaches, it may make sense in the current breach to have at the end or in the beginning, in the introduction, saying, yeah, well, in the situation of a group, or go to new section 4 or 5. So this is the kind of thing that we need to look at some point. So those are, it is on our table, and we have not yet started to work on that, but you would expect that we will present to you some additional material going forward. If we move to the next slide. Okay, so let's go to the timeline. You remember that in the introduction, I mentioned that our timeline is very aligned to what ISA 600 is doing, and we really depend on whether they can meet their own deadlines and address all the issues that they need to address, so we can consider them and integrate them for the purpose of our own exposure draft. So we expect to be able to show you a first read of a true exposure draft, not anymore a straw man. So I would say something that is already pretty good shape, and comprehensive in September. And we would like to be able to obtain, if possible, an approval of the exposure draft in December, hoping in parallel that IESB will be able to approve a final version of their ISA 600 also in December. The view that we have is, if they are in a position to adopt a final pronouncement, it would mean that they have already clarified all the concepts and the issues for which we were expecting some clarification, or at least, we know where we are going, and we would have enough content to finalize our own exposure draft. The ultimate goal is to be in a position to align the effective date of ISA 600. So when ISA 600 becomes effective, the code and all the related independence restriction applicable in group audit will also become effective, and there will be no gap or between the two effective dates. So that's really our ultimate goal. So here's the timeline. And I think that's it. I would like at that point to open the floor for issues, question on those two things. First, the other issues that we need to address. And clearly, if you think something that we are missing, or you believe, that we need to address, like for instance, the firm telling us perhaps you need to look at merger and acquisition and transition issues. If you believe that we are missed anything, please, of course, we'd be happy to know about it. We want that project to be very thorough and comprehensive. So if you see new issues, that's the right timing now for the task force to address. And also, if you have any question on the timeline, of course, we'll take that. So can we see if we have questions? Or perhaps, can you have an additional comment? I see you raise your hand.
Yeah, and just in relation to your open invitation for suggestions or points to further consider, I just wanted to maybe bring to the board's attention that during our discussions with IESBA staff on the quality management related conforming amendments, certain substantive matters were brought to our attention. So Lisbeth will be able to flag those and explain those to the board on Monday during the session on conforming amendments. Some of those substantive matters touch on the definition of audit team. So I just want to flag this to the board at this point, so the board can consider this during the session next Monday. So potentially a couple of additional matters to put on the list here of matters for further consideration by the engagement in group audits task force.
Thank you, Ken, for that. And I would also add that anybody who has suggestions now about things that are possibly missing might make them, but also later, they can, after this meeting, they can communicate, of course, to the task force. So can we invite any comments, suggestions, as Sylvie has asked for, or a comment about the timing?
Yes, I have one question in terms of our meeting in December. As Sylvie presented, IESBA will finalize ISO 600 in December. Their meeting will be 1 week ahead of us or behind us in December. So is it practically possible for us to finalize this exposure draft in December? Can we make sure that we reflect all changes, amendments in ISA 600 on a timely basis before the meeting?
I can give some element of response, but Stavros and Ken, you may want to add to that. If they are in a position to approve a final draft in December, you would expect that they would have already addressed all the substantive issues and the key elements in their pronouncements. And you remember that we are very closely working with them and with all the coordination that we are doing. So normally we should not expect any surprise or big change arising in December if they are indeed ready for approval. There could be some adjustment or tweaks, some wording, etc., that could happen. And I would say that if we approve a version, an exposure draft in December, I believe we will just say we will approve it pending, for instance, in a few areas, if there is a tweak of wording that comes from the December meeting, we will reflect it also either in our explanatory memorandum or in our draft. But we do not expect anything that would be substantive, because that would not follow the due process for the IESBA. But Stavros or Ken, you may want to add to that.
Well, Ken, you want to comment? I want to comment at the end.
Yeah, I think Sylvia said it appropriately. Absolutely, the board should not be voting on an exposure draft when there will be changes subsequent to an approval in the IESBA 600 text that would create misalignment or inconsistencies. So absolutely, there should be substantive alignment. And if there are wording refinements that ought to be picked up following the IESBA 600 approval, clearly those also should be picked up for purposes of full consistency. So absolutely, I think Sylvia has explained it very clearly.
Right, and may I only add that generally speaking, yes, this is a worry because of course a consultation is a consultation and things might change, but it's going to be precisely, to my mind, the test of good coordination in those last 3 months when, as Sylvie said, and I agree with that, we will be closely watching, our task force will be closely watching what changes are being planned in response to consultation. And in any case, we shall be able to agree on an exposure draft on condition that we align last minute elements of the with the ISA 600 decision. I must say that the only other thing I can say is that I am, of course, that's one item I'm in communication and in conversation with the chairman of IESB, because really we really want these to go together, and we really would like this to have the same effective date. So yes, there is always a risk, but I think we can mitigate that by the various measures, as Sylvie has said.
Thank you.
Any other remarks, please? I don't see any. I don't know if Sylvie or Cam, who have a watchful eye. There is. Robert, can you hold on for a moment until I'm sure that no member wants to take the floor?
I don't see any other raised hands, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So Robert, please, our PIOB observer.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. Hello, Sylvie.
Hi, Herbert.
Thank you very much for leading the discussion today. This is a very commendable project, very strong consideration for the public interest throughout, which is very good to see, including especially the expansion of the independence requirements when the nature of the work of different individuals is the same within and outside the network. The coordination just being talked about is great, and it would be a great result, wouldn't it, if the two boards can achieve that objective in December of getting the two sets of work out at the same time. Good to hear also the work with the regulator groups and their general assent with the directions. There's some considerable comfort to be had from that. One of the points which the PIOB has had about this project is the complexity. I think that's something which everyone has been recognising, and it's been great to see the clarity in many of the provisions. I noted some comments about the sentence length and such like, and that will presumably be addressed as that goes along. It's important to do so. It's also good to see, in relation to the question of the component auditors and the group auditors and the different independence requirements there, helpful to see that slide with the rationale there, and it does seem to be a sound basis and principle, doesn't it, for just to really for each to follow what is required in relation to whether they're a PI or a non-PI. But then when we come into the breach area, that's very important to follow through the the different treatments and ensure that the component situation links back up to the group audit partner and then through to those charged with governance to get the concurrence. Now, that's a key public interest issue, which in relation to the ISA 600 project that the IEESB has been doing, the PIOB has been stressing that point in its public interest comments there, just around ensuring that those linkages are clear and that the group engagement partner absolutely has the final say. And the point that was raised just towards the end there about what then happens if those charged with governance are not happy with the situation, perhaps that is something that does need to be addressed just with some further drafting as you go along. Just a couple of final points to mention there. Sylvia, I saw the slide in relation to reference to some exceptions and clarifications. It's just important to give a quick reminder about exceptions. I understand that that's just in relation to the scan of the rest of the code, but exceptions need to be minimal, and I'm sure that you'll have your mind to that as you go along. And just then finally, the reminder that the question about the external experts and the internal auditors sits outside the scope of this project, but the independence issues there do need to be addressed, and I know they're on the radar for the board to pick up at some later point. So I hope those are helpful comments, Chair, and just again to reinforce that the PIOB very happy with the progress with this project. It's very important, and it's great to see the collaboration between the two boards in the public interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert, and thank you for especially identifying the public interest points and the public interest objectives, which I too think that, as we see from the progress of this project, are in sight. So thank you very much for your comments. Sylvie, would you like to say something before we close the session?
Well, I would like to thank the board for the comments. I think they're really, you really highlighted some very helpful points, as we were going to the strawman. We will watch closely the issue of complexity. It is a complex project, so it's difficult to make something complex simple, but we will try to do our best, particularly when we go into more, I would say, serious drafting. I really appreciate also the support from the board, from the direction. I would say that the direction that we were given on the principle were extremely helpful, and it was making the drafting for us, I would say, easier, not totally easy because it's complex, but easier to know exactly the direction. The outreach was also extremely helpful because the timing of that outreach was perfect for us to test the waters in a number of areas. We will of course go back to some of the points that you are raising, and I really appreciate all the encouragement and the support both for the board members and the PIOB.
Thank you very much, Sylvie, and I will echo, of course, the thanks to the board members who I believe gave ample comment and good direction in the discussion today. But of course, I want to thank you, the task force and the staff, Carla especially,
yes,
who have done great work in following this, and also commend you for very good outreach that you've done to several different sets of stakeholders, and which has proved to be valuable, as you've testified. So thank you all very much. I'm going to close the session. I just want to ask Ken to remind us what we have to do on Monday, especially the time of the Monday meeting.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe just before I give a brief indication of Monday's agenda, just on the issue of a complex project, I was just thinking that we should be a little bit more sensitive to our discussions on this issue of complexity and what's complicated. So I think perhaps think a little bit more about the terminology we use. So maybe it's a complicated project as opposed to a complex project. just a thought that came to mind. So just so we're more aware. With regard to the agenda on Monday, we're starting at 5 p.m. Eastern Time with consideration of proposed conforming amendments to the code arising from the AWS-based project management standards. Those proposed amendments will be for the board's consideration with a view to approval for exposure. We will have a member of the IEESB staff joining us, the deputy director who supported the IEESB on this project, Natalie Dennis. Very kindly has made herself available, so we will welcome her. And then we will move on to an update on the benchmarking initiative from Laura.
Right.
So that's the agenda for Monday.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Brian, for the distinction between complex and complicated. This seems to be making inroads in our way of thinking. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Please take a good rest, have a good weekend, and see you on Monday. Thank you, Sylvie. Be well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.